Hey everyone, welcome to another episode on how to get the best out of Claude Code. So the biggest thing in the past week has been the release of Claude Code Subagents. With this new release, it actually adds the ability to have individual subagents to have specialized expertise. So you can have one that focuses on UI design, one that focuses on front end, one that focuses on security. And I think the best way to demonstrate it is by showing you an example. I just started out with a single PRD document, and utilizing several subagents, I was able to then end up with a full implementation, including the backend and the front end. And you can see it right over here. It was able to build all of this. And while this may seem like a simple app, it actually is a full stack app. And I'll be showing you how we were able to get from the single PRD markdown file to having a full implementation across both backend and front end. Everything you see in today's tutorial can be found in my Claude Code Builder Pack available in the description below. The Builder Pack contains all of the agents that you see running in today's tutorial, along with the source code for the demo application that was built as well. But not only that, the Builder Pack actually contains all of the source code and resources from all of my previous videos as well. Don't forget to check out the Builder Pack in the link in the description below. Alright, so let's get started with today's tutorial. Alright, so let me just start off with how you can actually create and utilize agents within Claude Code. As you can see in my .claude folder, I actually have an agent subfolder, and within it, I have a bunch of agents that I've created for the purpose of this tutorial. And the recommended way to do so is to actually type /agents in Claude Code itself. As you can see, it's already found the other agents that I've already done previously, but you can create an agent, and I like to put it into the project so that you can share it with other people, and it's highly recommended to use Generate with Claude. Okay, and I'm just going to use something funny here. I'm going to say an agent that tells a joke all the time. And what this is going to do is that Claude is actually going to generate an agent definition file that you can utilize that best suits this task. So the more specific that you can be around what it does, the better. Over here, you can actually select which tools you want to use, and you can check which tools correspond to which of the above categories here. So if you show advanced options, you can actually see the specific tools. But for now, I'm just going to use all tools. So just say you want to have a joke agent doesn't really need to do much. So maybe just read only, and then you can click continue. And here's something new that was just released. Now you can actually specify different models to use your different agents. So if you have an agent that's actually doing a very mundane task, you probably just want to use Sonnet or Haiku. And then if you're doing something complex, you want to use Opus, or you can actually just use Inherit. So whatever the main conversation is using. So in this case, I'm just going to use Sonnet, and you get to pick a color that you want as well. And I'm just going to use automatic color, and you can see that it's now created this agent. It's called a joke teller. All right. So if you just press enter now, you can actually see the joke teller is here. And so this section above here is actually really important because this is how Claude knows when and how to utilize this agent. All right. So that's basically how you create agents. And so you can actually utilize your agent by directly calling it now. This is also a recent change, so I can say joke, right? And then you can pass in whatever prompt that you want for it. The really interesting to note is that actually Claude will pick from your subagent list based on the task that you're doing. And that's actually where the power of the subagents really comes in, which I'll be showing you. Okay, so that's a very quick introduction to how to create these agents. I have created an entire repository. As I mentioned, I curated lists of I've actually created a list of these subagents that work pretty well. This has come from my own experience as well as building this tutorial and studying lots of different subagents that people have shared out there. I've made all of these agents as well as this entire project available as part of my Claude Code Builder Pack, which you can get in the link below. Let's get going with building today's tutorial. We're going to get started with building this app using our subagents that we have right over here. And the first thing you want to do is you just want to do Claude, and then I'm going to use dangerously skip permissions. And you really shouldn't be doing this for your actual projects. The reason for this is that if you allow this to happen, Claude will actually perform deletions and removals and potentially even wipe your production databases. So it's best to actually modify your settings.json to actually specify what things you allow Claude to perform rather than allowing everything. But this is fine because I'll be spawning off a lot of subagents and I don't want to be approving permissions each time. Okay, so that's step one. As you can see here, we've started this, and I'm going to hit start off with an init. You should always do this for any project that you have. And what I wanted to point out to you here is that we have something called a PRD or product requirements document. And this is effectively a document that outlines what we are trying to achieve here. And you receive this from your client, or you try to produce one based on your client's requirements. And then with this, it kind of guides you in terms of what you want to be building for this project. And I'm just going to preview it here so it's a little bit better, but it's actually a very simple PRD document. We just want to build a single read-only web application that displays a list of YouTube videos. And in this case, it's going to be a list of my YouTube videos. It says here the primary focus is on a clean, responsive, and visually appealing front end, the static data from the backend. Okay, so that's what it's going to be focused on. I'm going to actually put the list of episodes that we will be using for our backend. And it's basically going to be just a list of the videos from my playlist. So if you haven't already checked them out, you definitely should. And we'll be using this and serving this from our backend and onto our front end. That's what this is going to be. And while this is loading up, you will see it shall return a static hard-coded JSON array from here. I'm just going to put this into the right location. So you can see here, we have an episodes.json file in docs into here. And what it does is just that it lists all the episodes in my Claude Code playlist for my channel. Now it's already studied the CLAUDE.md, and this is always the starting point that you should do so that it understands what the existing code base is. Let's actually begin the process of building our app. So let's just jump back here. I'm just going to keep this PRD open for a second. And while this is happening here, I'm going to do IDE, just connect cursor to it. And sometimes it says IDE disconnected, but it doesn't really matter for what we're trying to achieve here. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to use the system architect agent over here. This is like a starting point that provides a high level that agent that specializes in designing an entire application, both front and back end. You can tag the agents by doing agent and then dash and a system architect agent, which I'm going to tag over here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say study the PRD document. All right, prompt it to design in Python backend with fast API to serve the list of episodes, like I mentioned. It should have a single get episodes endpoint, returns the data from this file, and then I would like for it to outline a basic structure that the front end will do. So this system architect will do both the back end and front end. And I'm just going to kick this off right now. And what you will notice is that by actually tagging the agent, Claude has now specifically picked the system architect to accomplish this task. One thing to remember, whenever you spin off sub-agents, they have no context of the conversation you have here, except for things that are explicit passed into it by Claude. And if you do Control R, you can actually see what is being passed in here. So when Claude actually invoked this system architect, he actually passed in this as a prompt, right? Based on the PRD and episodes data, design a complete system architecture for a backend, a front end, and then it provides all the information that it needs to accomplish this task. And the whole point of this, as we've mentioned before, is that sub-agents are intended to be context aware. So they deal with a blank slate when they start, and they only deal with the context that you pass into it. So it's a very important concept to understand. So a lot of people think that sub-agents just take the entire context window from the conversation. It doesn't. And there's a good thing about this is that it reduces the amount of tokens that is being passed into the agent. The downside to that is that if you don't pass the right context, it won't be able to accomplish this task. All right. The system architect has designed the architecture, as you can see, the backend architecture, as well as the front end, and then it's got some key technical decisions. So now what I want to do is I want to actually get this written down into a file somewhere. But the other thing to note is that at the same time, I might as well take this opportunity to design the UI and the UX wireframes for this app. And I can actually kick this off in parallel because there shouldn't be any overlap. And I will be doing it with this UI designer agent that I have here. And I'm just going to open the preview here. UI designer focus on creating beautiful, intuitive, and implementable user interfaces in key wireframing. And this is a very useful pro tip. Is you ask it to do ASCII wireframing, it actually helps when it comes to implementing the designs later. Okay, so I want to be able to effectively do the UI designs in parallel as we write this detailed architecture onto file. And the way you can do this is as follows. Based on the system architect's design, I want it to formalize the specification, outline the project structure, and write this to a file. The whole point of this is that I want this to be written down so that I can pass this as context to other agents in the future. The next thing you can do is you can actually say, use the UI designer, which I'm going to pick here. And I'm going to say that I want the UI designer to design the UI frames for the project and write it to a separate file, so not into the same file. And then this is the key thing to always say. In order to use the subagents, you have to say, use subagents to accomplish these tasks. And I put in parallel here to be explicit that these should be able to run in parallel. So I'm going to kick this off, right? We should be able to see that Claude now prepares a plan to create the API specification, and then it's also going to design the UI wireframes. Now, what you can see here is that it's already spooled up the PRD writer to actually write the specification for me. And now you can see it's also spun up the UI designer subagent to be able to do the UI wireframes. Now, a couple of things to point out. Note that I did not actually tag the PRD writer. I just said, based on the architect's design, formalize the specification. So you will see that it's really interesting because Claude has decided that the PRD writer is actually in a better position, not the system architect, but the PRD writer is actually in a better position to write the specification out. And you will be able to see this. This is the reason why. Because if you actually look at the description of the PRD writer, it actually not only focuses on being able to do PRDs, but it's actually almost like a tech writer. So it almost has enough context to be a good tech writer because it actually even considers, technical considerations and things like that. And this is what happens when you use Claude. And if you don't specify an agent as a sub-agent explicitly, it will do its best to figure out who's the one that's going to be doing the task. But in the case of UI designer, I actually tagged the UI designer explicitly. I'm quite sure that Claude would have actually picked the UI designer based on the description that you have over here. So this description here is extremely important because this helps Claude to be able to decide who gets to accomplish the task. And you will see that this comes into play quite significantly when we go on to finish the entire implementation after this. We'll just let this continue, and you can see that it's actually written the API specification over here. And you can see that it's actually a really detailed specification based on the system architect's design. It has the status codes, the exact endpoints, the schemas, the project structure, and like how to organize the backend, how to organize the front end, all the configuration files, and everything that you could think about that would be required to be able to implement this project. And that's the reason why it chose the PRD writer, because this style of writing things in this very technical way is actually what the PRD writer is pretty good at. And the system architect is mainly dealing with the overall system architectural planning, but it's not the best at writing it out, right? It does all of this and then it knows what it needs to do. And then it relies on the writer to actually write it out to file. One of the things about subagents is still very new. And occasionally you can see that Claude seems to just be spinning and not really doing anything. And sometimes this does occur. And I've seen people on Reddit and some of the forums actually mention this, that sometimes it seems that the main Claude chat has kind of like paused and it isn't. But if you're patient, you will actually see that it's actually doing stuff in the background, and then it will finish up very shortly. The main thing to see here is that these two things are working in parallel. All right, so now the UI wireframes has finished up. Like I mentioned, it seemed like it wasn't doing anything, but actually in the background, it was actually finished up the UI wireframes. And here you go. It says that it's successfully created 2 comprehensive specification documents using subagents in parallel. You got the API specification, which I've already covered. And now we can take a look at the UI wireframes. And this is actually a pretty cool thing. If you actually look at some of the other Claude Code experts, they actually mention using wireframes. It's actually a really good way to ensure it develops a front end that meets your expectations. So you can see here, it even has like a header section. It has a grid layout over here and a footer. And then it even shows you how it would look in a detailed view for each video, what the Claude content will be, how the buttons will look like. And then if you scroll down, it even covers like how it will look like on the mobile responsive view, so a single column. And then it will show you how it will look when there's a loading state. So when there's like the shimmering effect and how there will be a progress bar of loading videos. So it's actually a really cool way of doing wireframes and doing the UI design. And yeah, if you go through here, there's a lot of details about the colors and what to do. And this is actually a really great way to ensure that you will actually end up with something that looks pretty good. All right, so I've shown you how to tag a single agent to accomplish a task. And then I showed you how to kind of like allow Claude to decide to do a mixture. And then I showed you how to spin off agents in parallel. And in one case, I actually explicitly specified which agent to use, and the other one, I left it to Claude. So now what we're going to do is that we're actually going to unleash the full power of subagents. And what I mean by this is that if you actually carefully craft the subagents that you have, you should technically be able to ask Claude with a single prompt to effectively build the entire application. And so I'm going to say something like this. I'm going to say, implement an MVP version that works end-to-end. The MVP means the most basic functionality to get the app fully working and testable by me. And then I would say base this on the API specification and the UI wireframes. All right. And then I'll say do a very simple and minimal test to make sure that things work. Keep it very simple and light. And if you wanted to create a whole test suite and everything, you could if you wanted to. But for the purpose of this demo, just want to keep it as lean as possible. And then I will say, and this is really, really important here, you want to use sub agents to accomplish this task in parallel. Okay, so and oh yeah, you saw that my key got stuck there for a second, and this tends to happen a lot on WSL, and I'm on Windows using a Windows subsystem from Linux, and when that happens, the hack is to do Control backspace, and that kind of at least unlocks your keyboard. All right. Okay, so with this, you can see here, I have not tagged any of the agents at all. I'm just leaving it to Claude to figure out what needs to be used in order to implement this. Okay, so let's get this going. And now we're just going to kick it off. And like I said, the power of having a team of sub-agents means that you should technically be able to just sit back, relax, and assuming that Claude picks the right sub-agent for the right task, you can be confident that it will do it really quickly because it's in parallel. And you can also be confident that each sub-agent will do a really good job. And as you can see here, created a to-do list to implement the fast API backend and the Next.js frontend. This is the annoying thing about looking on Windows because there's a lot of dynamic content being rendered in the console here. Sometimes if I reduce the font size, it does become a little bit better, as you saw for a second there. But then after it starts being a little bit crazy once again. Ultimately, what I'm trying to demonstrate is the fonts are really small so that it's not get too flickery. But you will see here, it's so small now that I've actually lost my scroll bar. What you will see here is that it's actually running two of the sub-agents in parallel. So one of them is the Python backend dev, and the other one is the React TypeScript specialist. In the meantime, while this is running, I'm going to actually open up both of those sub-agents that they decided to choose. And you can see here that the Python dev, which I'll just do a quick preview here so it's easier to view on screen. We can see you are a Python backend development specialist, an expert in creating production-ready Python applications. And if you actually look at this, use this agent when developing Python backend services, or because we're using fast API. And then I've actually prompted this to use certain best practices. For example, using modern type hints and several other things related to writing Python code. And then it's very similar for the React TypeScript specialist. I'm sorry about this flickering screen here. You can see that down here, it actually covers a lot of like best practices when using both TypeScript as well as NPM packages. But you can customize this to your heart's content to get to where you need it to be. But ultimately, this is what I decided to use based on the code base. It's obviously the right choice. Like I said, you just leave this running and then you have a cup of coffee and come back and it should hopefully be all done for you. It's still going on, even though my console is still a flickering thing. The good news is that you can actually see that the code has actually been written. So we have a backend folder now, and then we also have a front-end folder with the code that has been written. So you can see this is a typical Next.js app that was created with Create Next app. And you can see the backend is a fast API Python backend with the main function running. So you can see the main function actually has a health endpoint, which is always very useful. And then a root endpoint that gives you the various other endpoints that it has. I actually really like this because this is how I would actually architect my backend. I like to have a explicit routers folder with all the endpoints related to that. So pretty happy with this so far. If you're not familiar with Python or Fast API, don't worry about it. All you have to take away from this is that it's written a simple yet pretty good backend based on compact instructions that I gave the Python backend dev, and it's actually done a really good job. We're just going to let this continue to run until the end, and then we'll see where we get to. Some time has passed, and you can start to see that the front end is beginning to fill up the rest of the implementation. So it's got the episode card components here, the error state, the loading state, the app page. It's got comments, right? So it's got the components written, and you can see that the Python backend is now doing some simple tests of the running server. That's just where it's gotten to so far. Okay, and so we're just continuing to leave this and see where it brings us. We're actually nearing the completion of this. You can see right here that it's actually running the Python backend, and then it's at the last step of the front-end testing. So it's just doing the tests right now. It's installing npm, and then it's actually going to be testing to see if the front-end can interface with the backend. So we should be at the tail end of this implementation. Just wait a little bit longer for it to wrap up, and then we can test it. I can actually see that within the Python backend dev is doing some curl requests against the endpoints and getting some responses back, which is a good sign. I do believe that the subagents is still a feature that's still in heavy development, and so UI aspects are still a little bit buggy, especially on WSL. But I'm hoping that you'll be in a position where this gets a little bit more robust and you'll be able to see the tasks as they're being done. As you can see, the Python backend is done now, and we just wait for it to complete the test on the React TypeScript one, and then we are good. All right, the MVP is completed. It's given us the locations of the backend and the front end. It says that it's tested things already, and it just tells you how to do it. So you run Python run, and then we install it in the front end, and then you run npm run dev, and then you can actually do a call to just quickly test it. So I'm actually going to test it within here and see what happens. And here we go. Let's expand this. You can see that yes, indeed, hitting our backend running gives me the JSON file that we are supposed to. So that's great. So one thing we can actually just pull it up within the browser. If you actually go to localhost 8000 and then do docs, it will bring you up to something called the Swagger interface. This allows you to actually test your endpoints using a very nice visual interface. And so, for example, there's this get episodes endpoint, and I click execute. You can see it actually returns as I saw in the terminal with the curl command earlier. All right, so that's done. I'm actually opening up within localhost as well, and you can see that it's actually over here, and all the videos are loaded up according to the JSON file that gets returned. And if you actually look at the UI wireframes, it kind of matches this, right? So header section, code mastering, YouTube video library, learn advanced development techniques, and then you have this main content area, and you can see that this is how it looks. And it doesn't have these text in between because the JSON file actually doesn't have the description. But then everything else matches the design, and we can actually test the loading state and the error state by actually killing the server. All right, so if we actually kill the server and reload, we can see that then what we will get is that you haven't failed to load videos screen. We couldn't fetch the video. So that's the reason why these wireframes are actually quite useful. I'm just going to start the server one more time. This time with the server running, and if I reload the page, it's going to be able to fetch it, and it works well. One thing that I realized here is that the thumbnails are not loading up correctly. All right, so after a bit of debugging, I was actually able to figure out why the thumbnails were not showing up, and now it's working. So yeah, this brings us to the end of today's tutorial. I hope that this has been useful to explain the concepts of subagents within Claude Code. I think that subagents are a very cool thing, but still in the early stages and yet to be seen how best to utilize them. I'm working on trying to understand these more deeply, and I think as patterns emerge, we'll get to a state where we will know how best to utilize this for larger projects. In the future, I'll be doing a deeper dive into how to utilize more complex coordination between subagents. So I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Don't forget to give this video a like, subscribe, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so that you will always be the first to know when new content drops. Also, if you're like me and often find yourself hitting the rate limits for using Claude Code, you might want to check out this tutorial that I made that shows you how you can actually use Claude Code with any provider and any model out there. So that means you can actually run Claude Code at a much cheaper cost in between those 5-hour rate limited blocks. This video has over 30,000 views at the time of this recording, so you definitely don't want to miss out.